Infectious disease, natural immunity, and vaccinations. Debunking myths. There are many myths, conspiracy theories, and misconceptions when it comes to infectious disease. Because there have been instances where diseases have been used in warfare and given at times intentionally, there are many present-day challenges to us having a full understanding. What is an infectious disease? It is a disease caused by organisms such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, or parasites. We're focusing on viruses. Viruses are infective agents consisting of a nucleic acid molecule in a protein coat that can only multiply within a living host. There are millions of human viruses, with over 6,000 fully sequenced. They are smaller than bacteria and comprise the largest number of biological entities. In the discussion around viruses, there are several myths. Myth number one, viruses are all bad. This is not true. There are some viruses that have beneficial properties for their host in a symbiotic relationship. It is called virus-host mutualism. An example is a poly-DNA virus in a wasp wing that is required for the survival of the wasp egg in its insect host. It is also apparent when some plant viruses protect against cold or herpes infections that are suppressed in humans. While it is true that viruses cause a great deal of disease, their relationship with humanity and life processes are way more complex. Myth number two, virus contagion is due to forces outside of civilization. This too is a fallacy. Viral contagion is a direct result of urban nature of civilization. Early civilizations were due to increasing sedentism. With sedentism comes crowding. With crowding comes agriculture, and with agriculture comes a new relationship to the soil. There are new microbes, and the topsoil is now exposed. With crowding comes increased density in a shared space with domesticated animals. This increased the chances of infectious spread exponentially. Hunter-gatherer populations knew to avoid early urban centers. They were seen as centers of disease. There are over 1,400 known pathogenic organisms to humans. 800 to 900 come directly from animals. They're called zoonoses. Cholera, smallpox, mumps, measles, influenza, chickenpox, and perhaps malaria arose only as a result of urbanism and, as we shall see, agriculture. We share 26 illnesses with poultry, 32 with rats and mice, 46 with sheep, 50 with cattle, 35 with horses, and 65 with dogs. Not only do humans share space with all of the domesticated animals, but their feces too. Mosquitoes and arthropods breed in feces. Indigenous people, primarily nomadic, move on and do not live near their old waste. Sedentary urban humans do. This makes them more vulnerable to disease. Hunter-gatherers eat large variety of foods and are generally stronger than urbanized, domesticated humans. Like plants and animals, wild humans are stronger and healthier. Pre-agricultural diets consisted of 120 or more different plants, eaten with more omega-6 and omega-3s, warding off anemia. Early humans had beriberi, pellagra, riboflavin deficiency, and kwashiorkor, but no anemia. The domestication of plants and animals made possible a degree of sedentism that did form the basis of the earliest civilizations and states and their cultural achievements. It rested, however, on an extremely slender and fragile foundation. A handful of crops, a few species of livestock, and a radically simplified landscape that had to be constantly defended against a reconquest by excluded nature. This is from the book Against the Grain. Myth number 3. Immunity is given from the outside. This is also a myth. Immunity is a natural process involving many functions and systems, some governed by evolution, others not, that protect the body from disease. There are host cells and defenses that the body has against disease. The hair covering every orifice is the first line of defense. Then the skin itself and the bodily secretions and mucus. Sweat, saliva, eye secretions, earwax, all have antibiotic and antiviral characteristics. Inside the body, there are a host of cells that readily respond: natural antibodies, serum proteins, macrophages, natural killer cells, and T lymphocytes. In the acute phase response, cytokines react in the brain, causing fever and metabolic and hormonal changes. The initial fever is needed to propel the infection toward a conclusion, which is usually signaled by a cessation of the fever. Infection by a virus causes an antigen-antibody reaction. B lymphocytes produce antibodies which attach themselves to the antigen and transport it to the systems where it can be destroyed or deactivated. Immunity at birth is innate immunity, and that acquired after birth is called adaptive or acquired immunity. Acquired immunity is due to antigens interacting with proteins called antibodies produced by the host B lymphocytes. The antibody recognizes the antigen by its specific shape, and its shape has been innately designed to match the antigen's shape, almost like a lock and key mechanism. In successful instances, the lock and key mechanism is effective and the noxious agent, the virus, is eliminated. In other instances, the antigen is producing at a faster rate or unfamiliar pattern, and the body's defense system is overrun or cannot keep up with the production of the viral agent. Then illness results. Sometimes the body thinks molecules that are from the body are actually from the outside, and the body begins to attack itself. This is the basis of autoimmune diseases like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, vitiligo, anemia, and others. As you see here, multiple sclerosis is one as well. Myth number 4. Western medicine is based solely on Western science, and Western science is European and based solely on white supremacy. This is inaccurate. While Western medicine is indebted to science, and both have racist elements, both science and medicine have origins in the indigenous and ancient past. Formal medicine, including surgery, originated in ancient Egypt, and their knowledge of disease, including infection, was vast. Additionally, the forerunners of ancient science had already been laid down by indigenous scientists hundreds of thousands of years ago. Even indigenous children worldwide could recite the names of hundreds of medicinal and edible plants, dozens of animals and fowl, hundreds of fish, scores of herbs, roots, and insects, that all can be used in their cornucopia of foods. They tracked animals, sailed by the stars, and hunted by understanding weather patterns, wind changes, and the movement of water. All of the first sea voyages, seeds for grain crops, knowledge of animal migration patterns, edible herbs and plants were known by non-European people thousands of years before Homo sapiens migrated into Europe. That is scientific knowledge. While it is true that Western medicine at times, particularly during slavery, was complicit in elaborating racist theories and dogmas, medicine itself originated in Egypt and China and even Mesoamerica and predates by thousands of years white supremacist doctrines. The Chinese invented gunpowder and movable type for printing and built a 3,000-mile wall. Ancient Egypt pioneered brain surgery, grand architecture, and nanochemistry, creating brilliant paint colors lasting 4,000 years. Ancient humans cultivated fire and invented the wheel, the greatest scientific and technological inventions of humanity. Myth number 5. Vaccinations are based solely on Western science and medicine. Both assertions are false. Vaccinations have their origin in ancient systems of Africa and Asia. The earliest known instances of vaccination were in China and West Africa in the 1500s. Africans in West Africa long knew that the breaking open of a small cowpox pustule and putting it on an open cut would inoculate one from smallpox. Done in China and India too, it was known as variolation and was an inoculation, as in actual disease material was injected into the cut. While this produced immunity, people at times still got sick. Inadvertently, some of the sickened Africans who were brought to the New World, along with Europeans, infected New World inhabitants with smallpox. Onesimus, an African slave, is credited with decreasing the mortality rate during a smallpox epidemic in 1721 New England. He had taught the African method to Cotton Mather, who reported that the mortality rate was cut from 14% to 2%. Why are African Americans, Indians, Mexicans, and people of color leery of modern medicine? They are leery because there have been real instances of abuse bordering on genocide and egregious occurrences both in the name of medicine and science. During the French and Indian War in America, 1754 to 1767, Sir Jeffrey Amherst and company deliberately gave blankets infected with smallpox to Indians to decrease the Indian population. Throughout slavery, American medicine and physicians were complicit in devising made-up names for fictitious diseases and brutally experimented on slave women. In 1955, the United States government distributed boxes with live mosquitoes infected with yellow fever to selected African American communities. In the Tuskegee experiment, lasting from 1932 to 1972, almost 400 Black men with latent syphilis were allowed to progress without being treated to see the effects of late-stage syphilis. Some died. Others went blind or had other serious health problems, still without known treatment with penicillin, which had been on the market for 15 years. From the 30s to the 70s, Puerto Rican women were subjected to forced sterilization. By 1964, over 20,000 poor African American, Indian, and Mexican American women and men were sterilized. So they are medical and scientific horror stories that one must be aware of. But modern medicine, particularly through public health measures and antibiotics, has improved world health greatly and decreased early deaths from infectious disease, poor sanitation, unclean water, and improperly disposing of human waste. Myth number 6: vaccinations are totally safe and effective. No medicine is 100% safe and effective. All, whether synthetic or not, have toxic properties. One must gauge whether the cure is worth the side effect and how potentially lethal the disease it is fighting is. In the history of vaccines, there have been some horrendous blunders. In 1929, in the Lubeck disaster, 251 newborn infants were given Mycobacterium tuberculosis in a contaminated vaccine, infecting 173 children with TB and resulting in 72 deaths. In 1935, early trials of the first polio vaccine resulted in many deaths and cases of contracted polio. In 1948, there was the Kyoto disaster in Japan, where 68 out of 606 children died from a toxin in a diphtheria vaccine. In 1955, polio vaccine suspended after 11 died, with many paralyzed. The cause was unknown. Myth 7: vaccinations are ineffective and are part of a worldwide conspiracy of control. This is not correct. Just as 15th century Africans, Indians, and Chinese knew, inoculation, variolation, and immunization all have their place. And there's no one agent of worldwide control. It is true that the twin powers of materialism and capitalism have an ideological grip on most world leaders and regimes. There is no secret Illuminati type order behind the scenes pulling all the strings. But there is the 1%, however, who usually move in self-interest with an eye to the bottom line. There have been notable successes, though, with vaccinations. A successful yellow fever vaccine was developed as early as 1936. Smallpox was eliminated from the United States in 1949, totally in the world by 1994. Polio has almost been totally eliminated. Polio was the scourge when I was growing up, and in almost every class there was a child with those brown boots and those braces, and many of us were frightened of polio. There's no diphtheria, much less TB, less measles, chickenpox, and rubella. Myth number 8: grassroots people cannot understand science, medicine, and pharmacy and make intelligent choices on their own. This is totally false. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings have shared scientific, medical, and botanical knowledge. Even though there were specific healers and people steeped in ceremony, everyone in early societies had basic knowledge of how to build or shelter a boat, track animals, collect plants, hunt, cook, make or repair utensils, or sew. And people should not be underestimated in their ability to decipher complex information in today's world. In the mid-19th century, an alternative group of healers known as Thomsonians, following an itinerant physician named Samuel Thomson, sponsored home-based physiology classes. These classes were designed to give ordinary citizens rudimentary knowledge of physiology, anatomy, pharmacology, botany, and herbology. In this way, people were being empowered. How would that look today with regards to the new Pfizer and Moderna vaccines recently developed for the COVID-19 virus? What is it about these vaccines that make them safer, yet developed in a shorter amount of time? In traditional vaccines, small bits of actual virus would be used, but it would take a long time to cultivate enough laboratory virus to be useful. What is done today is that a synthetic version of the virus's mitochondrial RNA, which makes the protein antigen that triggers the antigen antibody reaction in the host, is used. For Pfizer, in a double-blind study of over 45,000 people, and when you say double-blind, that means some people were given the actual vaccine, then others were given a placebo or a fake vaccine. Out of 45,000 people, it proved to be 95% effective with no serious side effects. Many did report modern flu-like symptoms after the second dose. For Moderna, 94%, it was proved to be 94.6% effective in a study of over 30,000 people. A new Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been developed that is 66% effective and requires only one shot. Both Moderna and Pfizer require 2 shots, roughly 21 to 28 days apart. And we must add too that both of these have gone through the short-term experimental validation. They have not gone through the long-term 6 months to 1 year validation that is usually needed for validation for a medicine by the FDA. And that is because of the urgency of the moment. With regard to preventing illness, both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are proving to be very effective. Less information is known whether they prevent transmission or not. The Moderna vaccine showed more promising results. Less is also known on whether or not a vaccinated person can transmit the disease. Information is still needed on an adolescent under 16 and pregnant women, although Moderna presently has a study going on involving both. It should be noted that Moderna is developed by a company with close government ties, and the research that allowed Pfizer and Moderna to develop medicines for COVID-19 is also being used to develop biological and chemical weapons. And we have to know too that in the United States and even the Western world, any technology that is developed has been run through the military first to make sure whatever military applications that it has, including diseases for biological and germ warfare, have been pulled out and culled before it is used for consumer good products, education, or anything. So that we always have to keep in mind. Given all the above, though, the critical question is, since COVID-19 is a potentially life-threatening illness, and I must add, extremely contagious with variants that are proven to be even more contagious than the ones that we know now, do the advantages outweigh the risk in taking the vaccine? Based on the data and the results and the lack of serious side effects for most people, the answer, and this is coming from me personally, is yes. And I will say this too, as a person who has taken one shot of the vaccine, some of the side effect that I received or had at this time was soreness in the arm, and that's about it. I've heard other people though have had soreness, they've had fatigue, they've had slight fevers. They do say that the symptoms after the second dose is a little bit more serious. These are some of the books that I've used. there's several other articles that I used that I didn't put in here as well. If you have to contact me, that's where I'm at. And thank you.